WTO. But the great pleasure in introducing Abhijit Das is that I can always say he's chip of the old block. So that one can say very briefly. Done a lot of commendable work. And I hope I don't get into trouble, or I don't get you into trouble, Abhijit, by saying this. 50% of Commerce Ministry's intellectual output is sitting here. But that would be a bit, I don't want you to get into trouble. He does a lot of work for the Commerce Ministry, which is fair to say. And I think it's been a pleasure interacting with him. Abhijit, don't talk of electronic commerce. Don't talk of technology, because now I find that there is time. So I want to, starting with my colleague Sachin, I want to again pick the brains in the next round on 5G, technology, and electronic commerce. So without touching on those, you're most welcome to talk about whatever you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for a very generous introduction. And I'm also grateful to the Scotch Foundation for having me here. I wanted to start with electronic commerce, but in due deference to what the Chair wants me not to speak on, I'll keep it for the next round. I'll start with the issue of domestic reforms. There are two perspectives. One perspective is we reform only under pressure. We can reform if we sign trade agreements. My apprehension in following the prescription that we reform by signing trade agreements is that we miss out on the opportunity of deciding which sector to reform, what should be the pace of reform, what should be the depth of reform. And if we do not take these three variables into consideration adequately, then we might be led astray in the wrong direction. So my submission before this August House is that the reform in the Indian economy has to be domestically led and not determined by external considerations. The second point is on competitiveness, and I will link that with global value chains. The common prescription that we get from World Bank, UNCTAD, even from the WTO, is that, well, you lower your tariffs, make your trade regime more liberal, and maybe that is the mantra to get linked into global value chains. It's partly right, but all these prescriptions forget two very important variables. Sachin mentioned it in passing. What is really preventing us from capturing value in global value chains is our labor. Our labor laws are too rigid. Thereby, we are missing out on economies of scale. Bangladesh is a prime example. How many industrial units do we have in India which employ more than 1,000 labor? I think we can count on our fingertips. And maybe our fingers will run out before the number of units run out. Go to Dhaka. You literally have hundreds of such units there. We are really missing out on the opportunity of integrating into global value chains, of generating incomes, and more importantly, generating employment. So one of the most fundamental and perhaps the most important reform which is required domestically for capturing value is labor reforms. That is what will help us garner gains from economies of scale. And that, I think, is the way to go about. Even if we liberalize our trade policy, if we do not do labor reforms, I'm afraid the gains will just not come to us. A very quick look at WTO issues. The chair mentioned in passing about what's happening at the crown jewel of the WTO, namely the appellate body. Some of you might be aware that the dispute settlement at the WTO works at two levels. There's something called a panel, and some aspects of the legal interpretation of panel reports can be appealed. And if in the absence of the appellate body, effectively, there is no dispute settlement system. And if there's no dispute settlement system, we do not have a system for legally making sure that countries comply with their obligations and other countries enjoy their rights. Now, US is the culprit in this. But having said that, what can India do? We can, of course, keep on arguing that we want to revive the appellate body, but the important point is appellate body is a public good. And there are demands that developing countries like India make a payment to revive the appellate body. That I don't think is the right way forward. We must be pragmatic enough, and the central point we must bear in mind is whatever reforms happen in the dispute settlement system, we must be a part of only that reform which includes United States in it. Many alternatives are being considered which do not include United States. That I do not think is the way to go forward. I'm going to stop at that, and maybe we can have questions later.